Jessica Dishon was a 17-year-old girl with dreams and aspirations of being a chef, and while her meals were occasionally not edible, as her brother would later admit fondly, her family was heartbroken to discover that their sweet little angel had gone missing, and the only thing she left behind was her phone, her purse, which contained her driver's license, her backpack, and one of her shoes. But apparently, the police department initially thought that she wasn't missing. Why would a 17-year-old run away from home without her purse, while leaving her driver's license and everything that could help her behind? And why would she decide to leave one of her shoes behind in the first place? Despite the fact that Jessica's family was convinced that their little girl had gone missing, the authorities maintained their stance that nothing had happened to Jessica. But what exactly happened anyway? And how did a 17-year-old who was last seen leaving home for work, in her newly bought red Pontiac that she had bought with the money she earned from her part-time job, suddenly wind up in the woods, strangled to death just 7 miles from her home in 1999? Stay tuned, because in this video, we'll be sharing the devastating story of how Jessica Dishon's murder stayed an unsolved case for 15 years. And yes, you heard that right. 15 years. Jessica Dishon was just like any other average teenager in the 90s. A responsible girl with beauty and brains. Jessica Dishon grew up with her parents and 2 younger brothers, while harboring dreams of moving out of the city and becoming an accountant someday. Perhaps that was why the police thought she had done what other girls her age did. Suddenly decide that she was tired of the countryside and run away from home. But that wasn't the case with Jessica Dawn Dishon. She was more responsible than people gave her credit for, and very hardworking and humble, to say the least. At the young age of 17, she already owned a car that she had bought with her saved-up earnings from work. It was obvious that Jessica was going places. Despite the fact that she had to combine schoolwork with her part-time work, Jessica still got good grades at school. And to top it all, life seemed to be going so smoothly for Jessica. Things were going well in her life, and she was becoming more and more independent. Her life seemed full of opportunities and happiness, since she had just bought a new car and was said to have a new boyfriend. Jessica was very close to her family, which is why they couldn't believe that she could just leave them without saying a word. A few months after Jessica turned 17, on September 10th, 1999, her mom, Edna, got home around 1 p.m. When Edna saw Jessica's brand new red Pontiac in the driveway. She thought it was strange right away. Jess would have driven her car to school, where she had class until 2:30 today. She went over to the car and peered inside to see if Jessica was there, but she wasn't there. Edna called her husband Michael instantly. Michael is Jessica's father, and he was also confused because he thought Jessica would be at school at the time. Because Edna was so worried, she chose to look inside Jessica's car more closely. The bag, backpack, and only one shoe of Jessica were inside the car, along with her cell phone, which was sitting on the passenger seat. She also noticed that the car keys were on the ground and tried to start the car to see if it would work. Edna assumed that Jessica might have taken a different route to school because her car was not working. But no, the car was fine. After calling Jessica's school, Edna was shocked to hear from Central High School that Jessica had not shown up for school that day. As soon as Michael, Jessica's dad, got back to the house to help Edna, he checked the car again. The phone had already been set to 911, which he saw when he picked it up. It was clear that Jessica was trying to call 911, but something or someone stopped her. Edna and Michael called everyone they knew quickly to see if anyone knew where Jessica was, but no one had seen her. They knew something was wrong because their worst fears came true. Around 5 p.m. that same day, Jessica's parents called the sheriff's office to say that Jessica was missing. When they got there, only one new deputy, David Greenwell, thought there might have been something seriously wrong with Jessica and that she might have been a victim of foul play. Greenwell's top police, on the other hand, didn't believe Edna and Michael. Instead, they thought Jessica was just running away and would be found soon. David Greenwell was the only officer who really thought something was wrong, so the next day he went to the crime scene. It was clear to him that this was not a runaway, which is what his superiors thought it was. Greenwell put his whole heart and soul into searching the crime scene for evidence, but the other officers kept discouraging him, and when he tried asking for their help, they wouldn't help or take things seriously. As a new agent, he ran through the case and made important mistakes along the way. It looked like Jessica's case was getting lost because they forgot gloves and let people into the scene without permission. Also, the local police didn't seem to be paying attention, but people in the neighborhood wouldn't let Jessica disappear. Because the cops weren't doing anything, they got together and set up search parties to look all over Bullet Town for any sign of her. Michael Dishon and others risked the dangerous riverbeds because they had to find Jessica badly, even when they got sick while they were searching. They knew that most of the dirt in their town eventually ended up at the bottom of the river, where it piled up after some time. Chris, Jessica's brother, would later inform his family that he thought he had heard her crying for help, which gave her family a little hope. Seeing a neighbor burn clothes made Michael and Stanley even more suspicious, so they decided to do something about it themselves, even though there were risks. They didn't give up until they got a warrant that let them into the neighbor's land. A pair of gloves and a rope were found, which raised some questions about the neighbor, but did not provide enough proof to prove their innocence. As Jessica's family's anger grew, they turned to the FBI. This gave the case a boost of urgency. When the FBI learned they were wrong about what they had initially thought, they put more effort into the case. Unfortunately, too many people had already searched through Jessica's car for a thorough fingerprint scan to turn up anything. With each passing day, the FBI pieced together a chilling theory that Jessica had been taken by someone she knew. Every piece of evidence led to their neighbor Bucky Brooks, but justice was still hard to find because there wasn't a body or solid proof. The people in the community held their breath, holding on to hope in the middle of the darkness. They prayed for the day when Jessica would come home, ending the rumors and bringing everyone together. The whole thing is just insane. Why would the cops refuse to put in an effort in the first instance? After 17 painful days of not being seen or heard from, September 27, 1999, was a sad turning point. Karen Hobbs, who drives a bus, saw something scary on her regular run through the riverbeds. With her heart racing, she called 911 and told them about a scary find, a body lying against a tree in the thick brush along the Salt River. When the police arrived, they discovered the sad truth. A young woman who was only partially dressed, with a body that had suffered significant damage from time and nature's harsh embrace. A rope that was silver, red, and gray in color was holding her to the ground. It was a sad reminder of the bad things that had happened. After Jessica's body was found, Edna was called to do an unbearable thing. She recognized the unrecognizable face of her beloved daughter, Jessica. Meanwhile, Michael couldn't bear to look at the face of his little girl, who had suffered such a cruel fate. Jessica's family was heartbroken to learn that she had not died an easy death, but they decided to thank the community for always being there for them because it had been their lifeline during the worst times. It was heartbreaking to learn about Jessica's last moments during the autopsy. Her innocent soul was cruelly taken away from us. Her once beautiful face was scarred by blunt force trauma, and the chilling grip of strangulation sealed her sad death. Why would anyone do such a thing to such a sweet angel? While everyone couldn't understand this, the truth stayed out of reach, escaping the grasp of justice. David Bucky Brooks became the first suspect on everyone's mind because his stories kept changing, turning into a web of lies. It was when the cops asked Bucky about Jessica that he said he had seen her walking toward her school on the day she went missing. He later changed his story, though, and said he and his wife had been in bed all morning, but his wife eventually denied this. What was more surprising was the fact that several witnesses said they had seen Bucky's van on the road where Jessica was later found in the days before she was found. Because Bucky kept changing his story, the FBI gave him a number of polygraph tests. He failed 4 of them, and the results of the other 2 were not clear. David Bucky Brooks was charged with capital murder 16 months after Jessica went missing. In January 2003, David Bucky Brooks' trial began. The government planned to ask for the death sentence. From this point on, Jessica's family was glad that the cops had found the person who killed her and that she would finally be getting justice. On the other hand, the hearing did not go well. It was clear that the local police only cared about Bucky and did a terrible job with the whole case. They messed up the evidence, didn't pay attention to the case for the first 48 hours, and didn't have any real proof for Bucky Brooks' confession. There was no conviction for Bucky Brooks in his 2003 trial, which meant that the case really fell apart. This was because Detective Charlie Mann had said something on the stand about the failed polygraph test, which could not be brought up again because polygraph tests are not valid in court due to their inaccuracy. In September 2003, authorities dropped the charges against Bucky Brooks because they didn't have enough proof to get him convicted. This is when Jessica's case stopped being looked into for 15 years. After their daughter was killed in the subsequent mistrial, Edna and Michael started to move apart. Grief put a lot of stress on their marriage and broke the bonds they used to hold dear. They divorced because loss had broken their hearts. Even so, there was a glimmer of hope when a new person joined the fight. Detective Lynn Hunt, who works in Shepherdsville, Kentucky, is an expert at solving cold cases. She got a call from an old co-worker who wanted her to look into a case that had been closed for a long time. Lynn was shocked by how badly the case had been handled and how little attention had been paid to it from the start. She decided to start over because there wasn't much proof and the information was all over the place. Her trip brought her to the front door of the Dishon family, where Jessica's room had been left empty for a long time. Michael had remembered everything about the day his daughter was taken away, as if time had stopped, which was a powerful sign of his love. Lynn's careful study turned up an important piece of the puzzle: Bucky's mental evaluation. When she learned that he had a low IQ, she was shocked and understood how badly he had been treated. Due to his cognitive problems, Bucky had no way to defend himself against the complicated judicial system. His inconsistent accounts showed how weak he was. In the middle of all the chaos, Bucky and his loyal wife, Irene, stood firm, saying that he was innocent even though everyone else thought he was guilty. They held on to each other like a lighthouse in the storm of doubt and charges that turned their world upside down. As Lynn dug deeper, a hint of the truth came out of the dark. A prisoner gave the investigation new life and raised the chance of a long-awaited breakthrough. So how exactly was Jessica killed? It seems that Jessica's killer had a fight with her in her garden, wherever they lived, and then he started laughing in a creepy way. He got a scarf by going inside, and it wasn't even as if he wasn't aware that she was dead. He knew she was dead, but rather than feeling remorseful for whatever he had done, he began to cut her up. How did he get her to come with him? The prisoner later revealed that after that, he left her, leaving her in the woods, by the road, and by the river. Someone in the prison said that the killer was Stanley Eddington, who is Jessica's uncle. This was the same Stanley who talked to her family, came over to help his brother Michael look for Jessica, and threw up during a civilian search. It turned out that he had faked being sick because they were only a half-mile from where Jessica was found and wanted to keep the search party from focusing on him. The two prisoners said Stanley strangled Jessica with a scarf after she told him she would no longer keep her secret. He had been abusing Jessica in the family home for many years while he lived there. This was his secret. Also, when he found out that Jessica had a boyfriend that morning, he got mad. At this point, Stanley Eddington was already in jail for hitting other kids. He was in prison for 10 years for first-degree sodomy when he was charged with sexual abuse and sodomy in 1982, which had nothing to do with his current case. The police said the girl was younger than 12 years old. Police Detective Lynn Hunt and Jessica's brother went to the place where Jessica was found to get more proof that Stanley had killed her. They went into the woods and found the Greenwell Ford Road barn that had been left empty. It was so dirty and grim inside when they went in. They found a bed sheet hidden deep under all the trash and dirt. There was what looked like a sheet that matched her bedspread, but it was torn and falling apart. Speaking to him from behind, I told him, "That looks awfully like her sheet or her sheets on the bed." He leaves. When I don't know her room's still the same as Michael had left. Jessica's room has been empty since she went missing. They were able to match the bed sheet to the bedding that was still on Jessica's bed. They took the blanket off, but there was no fitted sheet or comforter on the bed. Stanley Eddington refused to confess to the crime when the cops asked him to. The cops needed more proof to find him guilty. They learned that Stanley had a past of abusing young girls and that many of the girls he had hurt were family members' children. Stanley would be welcomed into his relatives' houses and given a place to stay. To repay them, he would abuse their young children. 3 of these young victims, who are now adults, decided to testify against Stanley, and some of them spoke about how he hurt them during his sentencing. Stan pleaded guilty to manslaughter and other sex crimes at his sentencing, but his fellow inmates also testified against him. One of them admitted that he had told them he had taken Jessica hostage and kept her for a few days in an empty barn. Things might not have changed if the police had sped up their probe. Stanley had abused her and then killed her by strangling her. He then cut her up to make it look like there was a problem with the drug deal. On the other hand, Stanley must have felt bad about what he did because he moved her body in order to help people find her. Detective Lynn Hunt and her team believed the prisoner because he knew too many details about the case and the evidence that only the killer would have known. The information the prisoner provided was consistent with Jessica's autopsy report and supported by information from a different prisoner with the same name. During the hearing, both of Jessica's parents spoke out against Stanley. As Stanley looked right at him, Michael broke down in tears. He was upset that Stanley had taken in his brother, helped him find a job, and then used this to repay him. Stanley, however, refused to say that he was guilty. He decided to enter an all-ford plea, which is a type of guilty plea in which you don't say you did it, but agree that the prosecution has enough proof to convict you. Stanley Dishon admitted to 4 counts of sexual abuse and the manslaughter of Jessica Dishon. He only got 20 years in prison with the possibility of release because of the plea deal. Stanley is set to get out of jail on August 31st, 2033, but he could get out as early as December 31st, 2028, which is only a little over 4 years away from now. In 2002, the police found another prisoner who testified against Stanley. This witness was in the same cell as Stanley when Stanley admitted to killing Jessica and dumping her body in the river bottoms. The case should have been solved a lot faster since this letter was seen by the sheriff's office, but nothing was done about it. All of this happened while Bucky Brooks was being tried. Even though this would have helped the case a lot faster, the DNA evidence had already been tampered with, so there was no real way to tell if Stanley was the killer. Even though the case seems to have a happy ending, Edna and Mike both think that it's unfair, that all these things still wouldn't revive their daughter. Both agree, though, that Stanley wasn't the only one involved. They say that at least 2 people would have had to move her body. Edna believes that Stanley did it, and she's not going to change my mind about that. But if there are other people involved, they don't need to be out on the streets. Remember the girl who is at the heart of this case? Her name was Jessica, and she was a senior at Bullitt Central High School at the time. She worked, had friends, and most importantly, she had a bright future ahead of her. What are your thoughts on the chilling story of Jessica Dishon's death? Do you think he deserves an even worse fate? Let us know in the comment section below. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel to stay updated on the latest true crime content.